the next biggest thing is income.
Yep.
So the level of income that you've got basically impacts and influences the type of lifestyle that you can expect to lead.
Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host.
Andrew. Bills, here we are back again. Same intro, same lines that we use every single time. I've lost my creative spark. So 174 episodes in, 73.
There's something to be said about consistency.
Yeah, exactly
and
right.
familiarity, right? So it's for people to recognize the 360 brand as soon as they hear it coming over the airwaves.
Yep, it's exactly the same every time.
They get excited. But each week in and week out, we are talking about different topics.
Exactly right.
So what are we talking to everybody about today?
So today we're talking a little bit about downsizer contributions into super. So we're looking at some of the rules that are associated with it. We're talking about why someone would consider it, why it's even a thing, and just essentially looking at a few different strategies that can come out of downsizer contributions.
Andrew, this is a pretty fitting time to be talking about this as well too. I mean, we've just seen time of recording. Obviously, we record these a little bit in advance and stuff, but we've seen the Reserve Bank finally move on interest rates. The mortgage brokers were what were they doing? They were protesting. I can't even get it out. I was so excited. They were protesting at the front of the RBA because they wanted to make sure that the rates got reduced. The RBA looks like they caved to the political pressure because we are facing an election coming up soon. So this is fitting because hopefully it stimulates, and this is a really long draw to bow, hopefully it stimulates more properties being transacted on because there's more confidence back in the market that rates have now gone down and property prices are going to start increasing again.
I mean,
what
on
do you
that,
reckon?
I kind of, just to pull it back a little bit around some of the stuff in that spiel, I would love to just talk to just anyone in the RBA and find out how much of an actual impact protesting in front of the RBA made in their decision to reduce interest rates. I reckon it was as close to zero as humanly possible. But I could be wrong. So if anyone's got any inside information to the contrary, I would love to hear it. But yeah, that was definitely an interesting one. Didn't expect people to be protesting.
That's going to go in the box of things we're never going to find out.
Yeah, exactly right.
Because I reckon there was nothing to do with the protests and probably more so to do with the phone call from the Prime Minister. Right? That's what my gut tells me, right? So it's an election year. The Labor Party need to make sure that they seem to be doing stuff to decrease the cost of
if we're seeing anything with what's going to
pressure.
happen with the JFK files, maybe that box will be opened one day.
Still waiting. I'm still waiting for that. I'm still waiting for the Epstein files. I'm still waiting for P. Diddy to get his reckoning. Andrew, this is going
totally off track. It's not even funny.
But no, I do promise you
we started different though. There is
a reason why. Right. So if we go back to the crux of the downsizer contribution, so if we think about what the downsizer contribution was originally designed to do, I guess this was an opportunity for people who, if you kind of follow a generalized life cycle of a family home, people get together in a relationship, they raise some children, they need a bigger house, the children leave the nest and go and live their own lives. All of a sudden you've got the elderly parents in a house that's too big for them and it's not fit for purpose. So it's like, okay, there's an opportunity here to encourage you to downsize your house because it's not fit for purpose anymore because you don't have your children in there. And as an incentive, we'll give you the opportunity to be able to contribute money into superannuation. There's some limits and some thresholds that do apply. It doesn't impact your other limits and thresholds that you've got. We'll go through that in a sec. But it was sold under the guise of being able to create more stock in the housing market.
Yep.
Whereas going back to sort of beating up on the government and the RBA and stuff like that, I actually think this was more of an opportunity to try and help boost the baby boomers' retirement income or retirement savings so they can have more income. But that's my take on it.
And less age pension. I mean, you consider it, your family home is an exempt asset from age pension, and by downsizing into superannuation, you're in essence converting an asset from being non-assessed to age pension to assessed from an age pension perspective when it's held inside of superannuation.
And releasing that equity and turning it into, most of the time, income-free or tax-free income.
Yeah, exactly right. So look, aside from
that's a long 5-minute intro, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly right. That was good. I liked it. So, Bills, I mean, look, take us through, not necessarily what is it, but why would someone even consider, before we go what it is, what you can do, all of that stuff, like just generally, why would someone consider utilizing the downsizer and in essence, putting extra money into their superannuation rather than having it as an asset in the family home?
I mean, look, in the experiences that we have dealing with clients day in, day out, the thing that we experience that has the biggest impact on people's lifestyles, and we're talking about a specific age here where, you're getting to maybe the end of your working career, or you've already retired. But I think the two things that really move the needle, other than things like health and family and community and stuff, and so take that off the table, but you think that you've got your accommodation costs or your accommodation sorted, so the roof over your head, if you're in a position to have a fully paid off property, that's fantastic. So sort of accommodation and housing security, tick. The next biggest thing is income. Yep. So the level of income that you've got basically impacts and influences the type of lifestyle that you can expect to lead. So in this instance, trying to solve this problem that we've got as a society being a couple of things. One, you've got these people living in these bigger houses that aren't fit for purpose for them. So we want to release that stock so then, growing families can move into them. A lot of people have got all of this equity tied up in their family home that's not being utilised to generate income for them. And then you've got the superannuation system, which provides some really attractive opportunities to be able to derive tax-free income, but you've got limitations on how much money you can get into super. So if you consider all of that on balance, it gives people the opportunity to release money or equity out of their property through selling and downsizing. And it's a funny, the terminology, because you don't actually need to downsize in order to take advantage of this.
Down price.
Well, not even.
Well, true,
actually, not even. All you need to do is sell a property. But we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So you get the opportunity to sell your house, tip more money into superannuation if you meet all of the contribution eligibility rules, and that stock then becomes available to other people to purchase.
Yep.
So it ticks a lot of boxes from that perspective, and ultimately, once we go through the numbers, the amount of money that you can get in and the income that it can then derive is very, very significant and can't be understated or ignored.
Yeah. And I guess ordinarily, I mean, you talk about things maybe traditionally when this necessarily wouldn't be around, you're probably looking at a couple of different options, which is one, you sell, like you still go through the downsizing process, right? So you release equity from your family home, you sell and you downsize, but for, whether it's age-based restrictions, whether it's you've already, met those caps, you need to hold that money outside of superannuation. You hold it outside of superannuation, all of a sudden there's capital gains tax, there's income tax, there's all of the taxes associated with generating an investment return out of your money versus it's in retirement phase in superannuation and you're not paying any tax on any of the income and dividends. Or alternatively, which is not all that prevalent nowadays, but maybe was a little bit more in the past, is a reverse mortgage. You go through a reverse mortgage, which maybe is, a good idea for another episode to talk through exactly what that is, how that works. But a reverse mortgage, in essence, is exactly what it sounds like. You continue living in the property, you're taking out debt against that property. There's a limit as to how much you can take out. A bank will charge you a very, very high interest rate as a result of it, but it gives you the ability to use that money until eventually, touch wood, you pass away. And when eventually you pass away, the beneficiaries don't receive a property that's fully paid off. They receive a property with debt. And so, a bank takes a portion of the property ultimately. So this also prevents people from having to, in essence, be forced into a position where they need to do something that's not in their best interest, or they're going to incur a fairly significant cost as a result of it.
Yeah. So talking through some numbers and eligibility, so you need to be 55 years or older in order to make the contribution.
That was recently changed, wasn't it? Because it used to be, was it 60 or 65? 60. I can't remember. Yeah, 60.
So there's that. You can only use it once in your lifetime.
Yep.
So that's the other consideration. And the home must have been owned for at least 10 years and at some point in time have been partially exempt from capital gains tax, which essentially means at some point in time it was your owner-occupier premises. So that's the broad-based conditions. Two people can take advantage of it. So two members of a couple per person, it's up to $300,000 is what the contribution can be. So in the event that there's two members of the couple that were living in that house and they meet the other conditions associated with it, they can tip in to their superannuation $300,000 each.
Yep.
As the downsizer contribution. Now that contribution does not impact any of the concessional contributions at the moment. That's that $30,000 cap, or the non-concessional contribution, which is the $120,000 cap, of which you can bring a couple of years forward and make it 360. But the downsizer, 300,000, does not impact those other caps.
Yep. So in essence, you can still be utilising all of the other caps. I mean, if you consider that someone wants to pump as much money into superannuation as possible, you look at it and say, okay, well, what's your catch-up concessional contribution? So your pre-tax, that 30,000 unused for the last 5 years, you add all of that up and can put all of that in one lump sum. What's your non-concessional contribution? So your after-tax, 360 within 1 year multiplied by potentially two parties as well. What's your downsizer contribution? 300 plus utilising that for another party. I mean, you're talking about a very, very significant sum of money that you can add into superannuation in one large lump sum and effectively mean that in your retirement phase, you're not paying any tax on any of the income, any of the dividends. I mean, even if we talk about, a pretty, and I'll utilize this in, maybe an example and say, all right, let's assume that your superannuation is generating a 7% return for argument's sake. Having $500,000, which is not an uncommon amount of money, sitting inside versus outside of superannuation, 7% on $500,000, we're talking about $35,000 a year. You're well over that tax-free threshold of $18,000. And if there's an investment property that's got a rental income or anything else, then you're definitely going to be over it. Versus in superannuation, you're allowed, transfer balance cap, tax-free income, where you're not paying any income tax on any of the income that's associated with any of those assets. So holding money in superannuation, particularly in retirement phase, I mean, some people would argue at any phase, but particularly in retirement phase is a very, very attractive proposition. And so what this does is effectively give you the ability to add in a fairly large lump sum in a very short period of time and release equity out of an asset that is not deriving any income and move it into an asset that is deriving an income.
Yeah.
You do need to notify the super fund as well. So before or while you're making that contribution, you do have to notify the superannuation fund that it's a downsizer contribution. So you need to make sure that it's not being categorized as a non-concessional or after-tax contribution, and it needs to be within a time period after you have sold the house. So you can't look at it and say, okay, 5 months later, oh yeah, we sold the house, I want to make the money into superannuation. It's not governed by financial year. It's not governed by anything other than the point in time in which settlement's taken place. So making sure that you're planning for it and doing it and giving yourself sufficient time frame to do all of that is very important.
Yeah, and normally with a strategy, like this, that you're taking into consideration, there's a level of complexity associated with it, and there's some nuances and timings and different thresholds and what have you. So you'd expect that if somebody was doing this, we'd probably see that that's being planned and they're under advice. But going back to your numbers that you were putting out there before, Andrew, how significant this amount of money can be is if you used your example of $500,000, even though that the the contribution with two members of a couple, the cap is 600, you're using numbers of $35,000 worth of income. So essentially, going back to what I was saying before about those two critical things, making sure that you've got accommodation and then income, if you then can downsize, and we'll talk about the downsizing and not actually needing to downsize in order to do this, but if you take advantage of the downsizer contribution and you're generating, so you've put equity into the property that you're now generating, you've released equity from the property, you've used the downsizer contribution, you're now generating an extra $35,000 of tax-free income in perpetuity. If you then multiply that out over, say somebody retires today and they've got a 30-year life expectancy, you go and multiply that $35,000 out over, call it 3 decades. With some growth, you're probably talking $1 million.
Yeah.
Tax-free. So it's not insignificant. It's extremely significant. So yeah, that was just an interesting illustration that I thought, would help.
Absolutely. And the more money that sits in your pocket and the less money that sits in the ATO's pocket is definitely something that we can get around.
They're going to get it anyway. Once you start to spend it, you're going to pay GST.
Wow. Which may be part of the idea, right?
That's what they call an economy, right? That's how it works. It's
exactly.
Just keep circulating money. But look, interestingly enough, the point that I was trying to make is if you had, say you had 600 grand sitting in a bank account and you met the condition and you sold your place for $1.5 million, and you then went and you took advantage of the downsizer contribution, but you went and bought another place for $1.5 million. So all the money that you've received from the sale of your house, you've gone and then purchased another house of the same value or even more. If you had more money on the side, you could take the $600,000 that you had in your bank account and use that as the downsizer contribution. So it doesn't necessarily need to be that you have to get into a house of lesser value and you can only use the equity that you've got.
Well, you're using the downsizer contribution at the point in time that you've sold your house.
Correct.
It's the corresponding purchase. There is no requirement around, that having been fulfilled before you make the contribution. And so,
or where the money comes from.
Yeah, exactly right. So in essence, you could do it and then still spend the same amount of money on another property.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and it's another mechanism to be able to drive assets into a tax-free environment.
Yeah, so even though it's called a downsizer contribution, you don't actually need to downsize to the actual definition of what a downsizer is, where you go from a bigger premises or type of accommodation and go into something smaller.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which makes me think that maybe the intended messaging wasn't necessarily on point. Maybe it was just a way to try and get some more money into super for our mates, the baby boomers.
Yeah, exactly right. Jules, I think that covers it off in terms of what it is, how people can utilize it, and why it can be powerful. I think one of the key takeaways in all of this is, make sure that you're getting advice, make sure that you're doing it with a strategy behind it, because it can create issues. I mean, that, example that you're talking about, you buy and sell a house and there's agent fees and stamp duties and all of that. So you want to throw that into the mixer and make sure that you're doing it with a strategy that's ultimately backing it up. But hopefully our listeners and our viewers got some value out of that episode. And if you did, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amaritis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Proprietary Limited, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.